This boy is Lucio Otubia. He was running away after being chased by the owner of a farm because he was caught stealing the crops. Ever since his father was badly sick, he had to steal just to survive until the next day. At night, his father couldn't hold the excruciating pain anymore. He told his only son that he must be able to look after his older sister. All night, he kept thinking about his father's words. The next day, Lucio had no other choice but to steal from the bank. At first, he politely asked the bank staff to lend him some money, but the staff refused to do so. He then grabbed the knife that he had brought and threatened the staff with that. In the middle of his action, he was so terrified that he wet himself because it was his first time trying to rob a bank. The bank staff decided to let him go and told him to go home. When he got home, Lucio's sister hugged his little brother while crying. She told him that their beloved father had died. The next day, Lucio was shocked when he saw his older sister packing her things. Lucio's sister said it was time for Lucio to enter military service. At that time, all men from the age of 13 were required to join the military for 10 years. Lucio told her that he didn't want to enter the military because it was time wasting, but his sister told him that if he didn't serve in the military, in the future, it would be difficult for him to get a job. Like it or not, finally, Lucio accepted it. 10 years later, in the city of Paris, France, it can be seen that Lucio has grown up. That day, he wanted to visit his older sister's apartment, whose address was sent when Lucio was still serving in the military. When they finally met, Lucio told her that he hadn't finished his military service yet. A few days ago, Lucio ran away from the camp because the food there was not good. Hearing the story of his younger brother, Lucio's sister was annoyed. He was annoyed to find his little brother had decided to run away from the camp even though his military service period was only 1 month away. Soon, his older sister's husband, who was named Patrick, came. Patrick is an accountant at a company in Paris. Lucio wanted to apply for a job at Patrick's place, but because he never went to school, Patrick couldn't offer him a better job than a construction worker. Patrick said that one of his friends, who is a foreman, needed a new worker. Without any hesitation, Lucio immediately accepted the offer. The next day, Lucio started working. While taking a break, he overheard 3 construction workers talking about the ideology of anarchism, a political philosophy that advocates a society without a state or is often defined as a voluntary, self-governing institution. They then asked his opinion about the movements of the anarchist groups. Lucio, who didn't really understand, only answered by supporting the movement. The next day, hearing the answer from Lucio, the 3 of them asked Lucio to spread flyers about anarchist ideology on the streets. His colleagues also told him who the most famous anarchist figures in the world were. Hearing all those details, Lucio became very interested in the movement and confidently said that anarchism is his life. That night, Lucio's friend asked him to let his friend, Kiko Sobote, stay at Lucio's apartment for a few days. Lucio, who doesn't mind, agreed to his friend's request. The next day, Kiko came with a large suitcase. It turned out that Kiko was a member of an anarchist group and a wanted bank robber. The large suitcase that he brought hid the guns that he used to steal from the bank. Seeing that, instead of being afraid, Lucio thought that Kiko was cool. When they were having dinner, Kiko offered Lucio to join him in robbing a bank tomorrow. Lucio innocently accepted the invitation. The next afternoon, they went to the bank to carry out their robbery mission. Just a moment after they went inside, Lucio's fear from 10 years ago came out and made him wet himself. Thankfully, Kiko came to calm him down by saying everyone must be nervous the first time they rob, so Lucio should be able to stay calm and stay focused on getting as much money from here as possible. After they finished stealing, they rushed to escape from the scene before the police showed up. They then went back to their place. There, Kiko explained that the stolen money was not theirs only to claim. Later, this money would also be distributed to finance the anarchist movement's demonstrations and help the families of poor anarchist members, and the rest would be theirs. Upon hearing that, Lucio felt like Robin Hood, who was stealing from the rich to feed the poor. Days later, they went to another bank to carry out another robbery, only this time, Lucio asked one of his friends, Ostoriano, to help them as the driver that would take them away from the bank after they took the money. In the middle of the robbery, because Ostoriano parked the car without turning off the engine, a passing police officer suspected something was wrong and decided to investigate. Soon after, Kiko and Lucio come out of the bank and rush to escape using the car. The police kept chasing them, but they managed to escape after bombarding the police car chasing them with bullets. On the other hand, a police inspector came to investigate the robbery. The bank manager said that he couldn't see the robbers' faces because they were covering them, but he remembered that the robbers spoke with a Spanish accent. The police inspector suddenly remembered the anarchist group that mostly consisted of Spaniards. He was sure that one of them must be the one they were looking for. At night, the inspector and the other police officers raided the workers' place. Seeing the arrival of the police, all of them immediately ran away. Unfortunately, several people were caught. including Lucio. At the police station, the arrested workers were told to take turns reading a text with a Spanish accent in front of the bank manager. When it was Lucio's turn, the manager immediately said that Lucio's voice was the most similar to the robbers. Without thinking twice, the inspector ordered his men to search Lucio's apartment, but fortunately, the police did not find any evidence at all, and Lucio was finally released. Since that incident, Lucio had never met Kiko again, until one night, Ostoriano showed him an article in the newspaper about Kiko's death. Lucio was very sad. As a final tribute to Kiko, they both planned to rob a bank to continue Kiko's ideals. The next day, after successfully robbing the bank, they bought a small printing place with the money. Lucio hired a woman to work at the printing place named Jeanne. Shortly thereafter, two beautiful women came to take orders for printed brochures. The two women were students who supported the anarchist movement. One of the women, whose name is Anne, then invited Lucio to join a demonstration in front of her campus the next day. The next day, because Lucio liked Anne, he came to watch the demonstration. Seeing Anne's speech, Lucio was so fascinated. After finishing her speech, she was offered by Lucio to join his anarchist group. Lucio was sure that Anne's intelligence and seriousness about changing the country would definitely match the vision and mission of his group. In the middle of their chat, a riot suddenly happened. Lucio hurriedly took Anne away from there. They arrived on a riverbank and continued chatting. Lucio told her that he was actually an anarchist and a bank robber, but he told her that she didn't need to worry because his vision was to steal from the rich to feed the poor. He distributed the loot to people in need, as in the story of Robin Hood. Hearing that, Anne began to be interested in Lucio. Weeks passed, their relationship got closer, and they finally dated. At the printing place, Lucio, Anne, Ostoriano, and Jeanne were watching TV about the conflict between the US and Cuba. Lucio was annoyed with the fact that a big and strong country like the United States attacked a small and poor country like Cuba. While discussing how to help Cuba, Jeanne had the idea to use the printing place for something bigger for the sake of the country. Hearing that, Lucio immediately got an idea. The next day, Lucio took Anne to meet his brother-in-law, Patrick, who turned out to be unemployed after being fired 2 months ago. Lucio then told Patrick his idea to help Cuba, which was to print counterfeit money. Knowing that Patrick's experience as an accountant might help, Lucio decided to offer Patrick the chance to work with him. Without any hesitation, Patrick, who was in dire need of money, agreed to work with him. They finally started printing the counterfeit money the next day. After exchanging all the counterfeit money in the bank and turning it into real money, Lucio distributed it to the poor anarchist family members. At that moment, while smiling, Anne told him that he was currently pregnant. Hearing the news of his lover's pregnancy, Lucio was very happy. The next day, Lucio went to the Cuban embassy. There, he told his idea on how to beat the capitalist country, the United States. Lucio said the key to a capitalist country is money, and whoever has more money will rule. So by smuggling counterfeit dollar bills all over the world, the dollar's exchange rate will drop and the US will definitely be in an economic crisis. Hearing that brilliant idea, the Cuban embassy decided to help. She told Lucio to go to the airport the next day to talk straight to the Cuban Prime Minister. The next day, at the airport, Lucio finally met with the Prime Minister of Cuba. When he told the Prime Minister about his idea, he praised him for his brilliant idea, but no matter what happened, the US was too strong for them to be against, and a small country like them wouldn't have a chance to fight back against such a massive nation. Lucio was disappointed when he learned how pessimistic the Prime Minister was. Outside, when he was about to go home, Anne suddenly showed up. While panicking, Anne told Lucio that their plan had been discovered by the police. The inspector and another police officer were looking for Lucio. Lucio immediately grabbed a handful of money from his bag and tossed it to make everyone scramble to pick up the flying bills in the air while both of them used the crowd to get out of sight. Lucio then changed his clothes and tried to escape, but the inspector found out about his disguise and told all his men to surround him. Lucio was caught and jailed. Months passed, and Lucio was finally free. At that happy moment, he immediately ran to meet Anne, who had just given birth to his baby daughter. 8 years later, after being released from prison, Lucio is still working as a construction worker, and for the past 8 years, he has never robbed or made counterfeit money anymore. One day, the foreman paid Lucio's salary with a check. Lucio had never seen a check before and could only be confused, but after it was explained that the check could be cashed at the bank, Lucio happily received it. After work, he picked up Anne and their little daughter at school. Anne and Lucio had finally married. Anne worked as a teaching volunteer at the school. In the afternoon, they went shopping at the supermarket. It turned out that Lucio didn't have enough money to pay for the groceries, but when the cashier saw the check in his wallet, she said he could pay using that. When he found out how easy it was to cash a check, Lucio's criminal brain, which had been asleep for 8 years, suddenly had an idea. That night at the printing house, Lucio, along with Jean, Patrick, and Ostoriano, gathered there. Lucio then told them his brand new idea, which was to make a counterfeit check from the biggest international bank in the United States, Citibank. Because the security system of the check is very weak, Lucio believed it would be easier for them to make a fake check, especially since the penalty for counterfeiting things that do not belong to the state is much lighter. Hearing the idea, everyone agreed. They then started making the counterfeit checks the next day. After many tries, they finally succeeded in making a fake check that really looked like the original. The next day, Lucio tried to cash one of the counterfeit checks in the bank, and as he had predicted, he easily cashed the check without any problem. But even though he was successful, Lucio didn't want to be rash. To outwit the bank staff, Lucio gathered the members of the group that night and asked them to help him cash the checks in several cities in France. That way, if their actions were caught by the police, it would be difficult to track them down. Lucio also told them to cash the check at the same time. A few days later, their plan seemed to be going smoothly. When the money was collected, as before, the money would be distributed for the demo, providing for the needs of the poor families, and the rest was for them to claim. Weeks passed until one day, Lucio's fake check was found out by Citibank. They sent a bank manager named Barreau to report the fake check to the police in France. Arrogantly, Barreau insulted the French police, whose work, according to him, was very slow. Hearing the insult, the inspector could only apologize. He then told Barreau not to worry. He told him that he would find the culprit in no time because he already knew where to look. The next day, when Lucio was picking up his wife and daughter from school, the inspector came, and without further ado, while showing a fake check that he got, the inspector asked if Lucio had made that check. Lucio calmly answered that he didn't know anything. It has been 8 years since he was arrested, and he has repented. He claimed to be a free man and an ordinary construction worker. After answering the question, Lucio hurriedly left from there. In the apartment, Anne, who had overheard the conversation earlier, was upset. He was disappointed because Lucio committed a crime again without her knowledge. Even though Lucio tried to explain, his wife still didn't agree. For her, there are plenty of other ways to change the world for the better besides committing crimes. Anne told him that earlier in school, she got an offer to become a volunteer nurse in Bolivia, and if he wanted to join, with his expertise as a construction worker, Lucio could definitely help the poor people there build infrastructure. But no matter how hard Anne persuaded her husband, he still refused. Even after threatening to take their daughter with her to Bolivia, Lucio still didn't budge. The next night, Lucio, Patrick, Jean, and Ostoriano gathered at the printing place. They just got news from the radio that, starting the next day, all banks in France can only cash one check per day. Based on the new rules, Jean said that it was time for them to stop. If Lucio is still determined to continue, the other anarchist members will be in danger of being caught, so it's better if all the fake checks are sold abroad. Jean's words just now made Lucio remember a convict he got acquainted with when he was in prison named Charlie. Lucio then asked for his help finding a foreign buyer for the remaining checks. The next day, Lucio met Charlie and then told him his purpose and negotiated payments. A few days later, after Charlie managed to get his prospective buyer, Lucio and Ostoriano came to meet. They met a potential buyer from America named Tony. Tony offered to buy the fake checks for $1 million, but he needed 2 days to prepare all the money. Instantly, Lucio got the idea to get rid of his trace. He would sell the check and then go to Bolivia with Anne. That way, the police would not be able to trace him. Lucio then told Tony that the transaction would be conducted at the restaurant 2 days later. In the evening, when he came home, Lucio was confused when he saw his sister, Patrick, and Jean in his house. It turned out that they visited him to tell him that the police had been following them for 3 days. They were so scared that they even thought street vendors were police informants. They were sure that the police must have known about their plan. With anger that she couldn't hold much longer, Lucio's sister yelled at him and blamed him for involving his husband in his action. Not only his sister, Jeanne, who was afraid of the police, decided to resign and refused to get involved again, while Anne could only remain silent. She was fed up with Lucio's selfish attitude. 2 days later, on the day of the transaction, through his apartment window, Lucio saw a police car watching him. He asked Anne to help distract the police, but Anne refused. Anne then gave him a plane ticket that she bought for him and said goodbye. On the street, to avoid the police's attention, Lucio deliberately created chaos and used the chance to get out of there unnoticed. Arriving at the restaurant where the transaction was promised, Lucio saw Ostoriano already waiting. Shortly thereafter, Tony came, but just as Lucio was about to approach him, the police ambushed him. Lucio was arrested again. In the prison, when he met his lawyer, Lucio angrily said that one of his colleagues must have leaked his plans to the police. The lawyer told him that Patrick was the only person who had managed to escape. He was sure that Patrick was the one who leaked the transaction. Lucio was shocked to find out that his brother-in-law had betrayed him. Not only that, but the lawyer also explained that there was other bad news. Barrow, the bank manager of Citibank, sued Lucio very severely. If the judge granted his demands, then Lucio could be jailed for 20 years and fined $50 million. At this point, he was in despair. While in prison, he could only regret his fate, until finally, when the first trial was about to start, the lawyer filed for a postponement of the trial on the grounds that there were several misprinted files. Barrow felt annoyed. He suspected that if the trial was postponed, there would be a possibility that Lucio would run away, but like it or not, with various considerations, the judge was forced to decide to postpone the trial, and for a while, Lucio was declared parole until the next trial. The news about Lucio was spread throughout France in the newspapers. He was nicknamed Robin Hood of France by the people. While reading the newspaper, Barrow was annoyed. He did not accept fraudsters like Lucio to be praised by many. He asked the inspector to immediately punish Lucio as harshly as possible, but the inspector couldn't do anything against the judge's decision. When the case reaches trial, the police's work is done, and they can't do anything about it. The next day, after receiving the information, Lucio met Patrick at the bar. With annoyance on his face, he asked why Patrick betrayed him. Patrick explained that he was not a traitor. It was right that the day before, a police officer visited him and offered him some money in exchange for letting him leak all the information, but he refused to cooperate. Afraid things would get worse, Patrick decided to take his wife out of the city until things settled. Lucio couldn't say anything. He had mistaken Patrick for betraying him. Lucio wondered who the real traitor was. At night, his lawyer came to his apartment and told him the results of his investigation. It turned out that it was not Patrick who betrayed him, but Charlie. It turned out that Tony, the prospective buyer, was intel from the American police. Charlie worked with Tony to trap Lucio. The lawyer also told him that the files were ready and the trial would be continued soon. Lucio was cornered. He couldn't sleep all night, thinking about his way out of that situation, until suddenly, he got a call from someone unknown. From the call, that unknown person threatened to kill Lucio if he still didn't want to give up. Lucio then met the inspector and told him about the threat earlier. He was sure that this was all Barrow's doing, but unfortunately, the inspector couldn't help because Lucio didn't have enough evidence. The inspector said that he actually didn't like Barrow either, so just this time, the inspector said that he would try to help and support Lucio. After receiving support from the inspector, Lucio rushed to the cemetery, where he hid his fake check prints. While toughening his heart, Lucio decided to accept his fate and play in Barrow's game. That very night, Lucio immediately printed as many fake checks as possible and then distributed them to all anarchist members. He then ordered all the members to sell the fake checks to all tourists across France. That way, the International Bank of America would be in big trouble because the fake checks would be spread all over the world. A few days later, Lucio's plan was a success. Barrow, on the other hand, got a call from his boss informing him that fake checks had been spread all around the world. Barrow knew for sure that it was Lucio who did that. On the other hand, Lucio called Anne on a public phone, saying that he missed her and their daughter very much. Lucio knew that he was wrong for not following her to the airport, but he promised that even though it was too late, he would go to Bolivia. Amidst the call, the police showed up and surrounded him. He was arrested for distributing fake checks all over the world. At the police station, Lucio met Barrow. Lucio calmly said that he had won. There was no other choice but for Barrow to accept a condition from Lucio. Lucio said that he would hand over all printouts of his counterfeit checks so that there would be no new fake checks as long as Barrow wanted to withdraw his lawsuit and pay him some money. He didn't rush Barrow to make his decision and told him to think about his offer first. If Barrow refused and Lucio was imprisoned, then every day, Citibank will definitely continue to lose money because the fake checks will continue to spread. Hearing that threat from Lucio, Barrow was silenced. He had no choice but to accept Lucio's condition. The next day, Lucio and Barrow met again at a hotel. Barrow had decided to accept the condition, and Lucio gave him all the remaining counterfeit checks. Barrow asked Lucio to guarantee that he would not print another counterfeit check again. While smiling, Lucio said that he had promised not to print any more fake checks, but he couldn't guarantee that. Besides, he knew that Barrow didn't have any other choice but to believe in him. After the transaction was done, at the hotel's lobby, Jean and Ostoriano had been waiting for Lucio. After finding out that Lucio was freed and had received a lot of money, they were very happy. They didn't expect that someone like Lucio could defeat such a strong enemy. A few days later, according to the promise, Lucio finally followed Anne to Bolivia. When Anne saw his husband coming, she was so happy. Lucio said that maybe his anarchist group in France had been disbanded, but the struggle was not over. He would continue his action there. Lucio then confidently said that anarchism is his life.